As in many places in America, the 70s in Boise were tumultuous. Americans were experiencing limits after 2 decades of economic growth. The turmoil of the 1960s had not ended, and even in quiet Boise, the foreign policies of the new Nixon administration inspired loud protests when Vice President Spiro Agnew made a stop here in 1970. Like many other American cities, Boise's predominantly progressive-era urban core was aging and crumbling. In 1965, local officials started planning for something different. Boise joined other cities and embarked on a program of urban renewal directed at the Boise Redevelopment Agency. Some of this renewal in Boise turned out to be good, and some, not so much. Despite the construction of a number of important buildings in Boise in the 1970s, the decade will be remembered best for the destruction of a large number of buildings in the downtown core. What was the plan for these spaces? Amazingly to us today, the agency made plans to use an 8-block area for an enclosed mall. This idea collapsed under its own weight in a decade of declining economic fortunes. It would be more than 20 years before the empty blocks were filled, and some have been left as surface parking lots. The story of Mr. Billy Fong symbolizes the issues of this decade. 84-year-old Mr. Fong was one of the last occupants of Boise's once thriving downtown Chinatown. Using funds provided through programs from the new Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Boise Redevelopment Agency purchased the Hop Sing Tong building along today's Front Street, where Mr. Fong lived, and proceeded to tear it down. As former city historian Ann Felton writes, as the wrecking ball approached his building, Billy threw out the white flag of surrender and left his longtime home. Before he left, Mr. Fong reportedly cursed the ground of his former residence. What exists now, where the supposed curse was placed? The Grove Hotel, built a decade later. Renewal was so prevalent, we even have a monument to it in Boise. C.W. Moore Park is dedicated to the skeletons of our buildings lost to redevelopment. Frank Coffin's Pioneer Building, flattened in 1971. Boise's Central School, the second school to carry the name, demolished in 1973. The Pierce Block, torn down in 1975. Other buildings lost to urban renewal in the 1970s include the McCarty Block, the Soldiers' Home, St. Alphonsus Hospital, the YMCA, and the First National Bank. All were part of Boise's history and taken down with a better idea in mind. Not all buildings are meant to be saved, of course. Locals will remember downtown buildings standing vacant throughout the decade. Vagrants lived in many, teens used some as gathering places, fixtures were stripped down, and many Boiseans relocated in new communities west of downtown. The core of Boise was looking like many other American downtowns. But this was more than a trend. Boise's demolition was enthusiastic. According to some Boiseans, Billy Fong's curse was real, as many of the buildings were either not replaced or replaced by something worse. Boise was not alone in this. Old cities saw their downtowns crumble as turn-of-the-century buildings aged and post-war development lagged behind the newer industrial powers of Japan and West Germany. Yet, despite domestic scandals, foreign policy failures, and economic recession, Americans and Boiseans plugged on and tried to be optimistic. President Jimmy Carter even visited Idaho in 1978 for a rafting trip down the Salmon River with his Interior Secretary and Idahoan Cecil Andrews. This trip resulted in the creation of the important Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. For all of the destruction downtown, Boise did see a number of important buildings spring up. Some of these buildings we use often. City Hall, which originally housed both Boise City and Ada County offices, Pioneer Lodge at Bogus Basin, and the Public Safety Building on Barrister Road. Other buildings constructed during the decade stand as iconic local landmarks. Bronco Stadium at Boise State University, and the Simplot House that looks over the valley and whose grassy hill has become, in effect, a public park. During the decade, the state of Idaho centralized government offices with a number of new buildings in what is now known as Capitol Mall. While none of these would be considered great architectural monuments, they all play an important role in our lives and the quality of life in our town. And, despite the devastating effects of the so-called renewal in downtown Boise, it was a threatened teardown that created the Idaho Historic Preservation Council, which has been devoted to the preservation of historic sites in Idaho ever since. In 1974, when a local hospital wanted to build a new parking lot that threatened the historic and elegant Bishop's House, Idaho historian Arthur Hart and local businesswoman Joan Carley helped organize citizens who, with the support of the city council, worked hard to save the house. In the end, it was dramatically moved down Warm Springs out to its current location at the Old Pen, where it has served the community ever since. Two buildings built during the 1970s have become landmarks in our town: the Boise Cascade building, now the Boise Plaza, and the Idaho Supreme Court. The Boise Cascade building was designed in 1971 by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. The distinctive plan, a large building that does not tower over others in the vicinity, is the result of a design decision. The architects elected to create a building that would not block the Capitol building to the northeast or appear to dwarf it in size. The building contrasts with the architecture around it. 2 blocks of parking lots separate it from the more traditional buildings of downtown Boise. Its dark color and tinted glass give it a very serious, futuristic feel, yet the building atrium contains grasses, bushes, even trees. Glass-sided bridges connect the offices to the elevator hub on each floor, allowing occupants to look out over the 6-story atrium below. On the outside or the inside, the Boise Plaza represents a large, bold step forward. It is monumental and bold, yet still waits to fully join downtown Boise, so close at hand. In contrast, the Idaho Supreme Court, standing like a downtown fortress, sits east of town on the edge of the Capitol Mall. Intended to be intimidating, as it is Idaho's court of last resort, it was designed in a modernist, almost brutalistic style by Victor Hosford in 1970. The building is nicely covered with Idaho travertine marble and includes vertically slotted bays that complement its austere exterior. The Supreme Court contrasts well with the Art Deco Ada County Courthouse and the neoclassical Capitol building, which are both located across Jefferson Street from the court. While many of the government buildings in the Capitol Mall were built in the 1970s, the Supreme Court building stands out with an enduring and intentional modernist style that still helps define the decade for us in downtown Boise. Ultimately, Boise survived the 70s and Renewal, and entered a new decade that would see a mall built out west and the construction of many corporate and education buildings that would symbolize new growth for this city as an important regional capital.